Dharmakaya, Chunji Namda, Jida Tazum Balden Robaso, Salam Chaja Chilanganyebe, Nyame Dogun Dabo Kajula, Soadeb Sokajula Manam, Jubadzino Nam Tarjinjilo, Shenlo Gomji Gangmar Soembashin Senor Kunla Chajin Patam Tsendi de ta chibi gom shenam ye kur shenba me brajin jilo mugu gom jingor sonba shemenga dergo jibila mala Junda Soade Begom Shena Jene Mogo Jewar Jinjilo Yeme Gom Jingwajir Sombashin Kanjar Tobengo Somade Majre de Karjo Begom Shenam Gomjalo Tandro Jinjilo Namdo Ngo Chugur Sombashin Jiyamayin Jiryan Charvala Mangarul Bachare Gom Shenla Korde Metobar Jinjilo Keva Kundu Yandala Matam Dalme Chije Bala Long Jing Satalam Jiyendrazone Norje Changin Gompanyor Tosho. The Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times. Who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. So now please think to yourselves that we are discussing the Dharma this afternoon, the Buddhist Dharma. Some of you might be here from curiosity, some for study. It's okay, whatever reason brings you here, it's excellent that you're here, and I'm glad to see you all. But as long as we're here and listening, then it's important that we do something that's going to be beneficial for us. And so the way to make anything beneficial, the first thing you have to do is have a good motivation. So I'd like to ask you all to please think to yourselves, just look at your motivation and check what it is. If you have a good motivation, that's excellent. If you have a kind of a medium motivation, then maybe try to improve it a little bit. If you've had any contact with the Dharma, then you can think about having the motivation of the wish to achieve liberation from samsara, or the wish to bring all sentient beings to liberation from samsara, the motivation of bodhicitta. So whatever level of motivation you have is fine, but make sure that you have a good motivation. And so we've been having these Saturday classes, most Saturdays. We've gone through, I don't know, maybe 10 classes, 11 classes so far this spring and summer. And what we've been doing, of course, we want to make sure that each of the classes is something that you can kind of take in as a whole on its own. But we've also been kind of going through in a sequence, talking about the sort of common teachings of Buddhism and the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism. And today we have come to the teachings on Vajrayana Buddhism, which is the particular type of Buddhism for Tibet. Well, I sometimes study too much. If we want to split hairs, there is some Vajrayana Buddhism in other traditions, particularly in the Japanese tradition and a little bit in the Chinese tradition. But in general, if you're talking about Vajrayana Buddhism these days, you're talking about Tibetan Buddhism and maybe some Nepali Buddhism. So we're in the Tibetan tradition in this temple, so we'll talk about it from the Tibetan perspective. But when we talk about these different types of Buddhism, they're not disconnected. They all kind of go in a sequence. So last time we spoke about kind of the core teachings of the Buddhism being the teaching on first selflessness, the idea that our idea of a self is kind of like an idea that we project upon all of the different things that are happening in our bodies and our minds. But other than that, we can't find any true, single, solid, enduring thing that we could label as a self. When you realize that yourself is this constantly changing set of causes and conditions, that you're just giving the name, the self, then that helps you free you from a lot of problems, because then you're no longer worried about getting hurt or trying to get things to help you, because what you is there to be hurt, what you is there to be helped, what benefit is there. And then it helps you overcome the things that really cause us problems, which are our greeds, our hatred, our ignorance, and so forth. Those in turn would motivate actions that then create suffering for ourselves and others, both in the short term. Perhaps not, you might not see the harm in the short term, but certainly in the long term. So it's really important to kind of realize this idea that there is no real enduring self. Then if you take that a little bit deeper, then you get to the kind of Mahayana idea of there being emptiness. So emptiness means that we look at ourselves and we see this, constantly changing constantly changing mixture of events in our bodies and minds, that then if you look at the events themselves or the things themselves that make up our bodies and minds, you can't find anything real about those either. You can, like if you think on a physical level, in modern physics they divide atoms and molecules into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, and in the end they can build as large an atom smash as they want. At the end you end up with just kind of what they call probability waves. In other words, basically nothing at all when you get down to it in modern physics. And it's same with our mind. If you look at what's happening in your mind really carefully, you'll see that there are lots of moments of feelings and thoughts and things that go by from moment to moment. If you really look at them, there's not a whole lot of substance there. A thought comes, and you don't know where it is. You feel it, but you don't know where it is. And then it goes, and you don't know where it went. You don't know where it came from. So there's not really any thought there either, but you experience it. So the external things that we experience don't really have any real existence, and the things that make up our mental experience don't really have any real existence, so we call this by the name emptiness. We use the word emptiness to say like it's empty of any like true, enduring, single, solid nature. There's nothing really there. That's emptiness. But when you say that there's nothing really there, that doesn't mean that it's nothing. There's a difference. It's not nothing, because we still experience everything. We still see something. So there's selflessness, and then a deeper level is emptiness. And yet emptiness is not nothingness, because we can still hear, you can still experience, you can still speak with other people, we can still operate on the everyday, what we call the everyday relative level. But on the ultimate level, there's not much there, and yet it doesn't stop. And so what this points to is that actually within all of us there's like this nature of our mind that we call by the name Buddha nature. Actually we can call it by lots of different names, but we'll just use Buddha nature for today. It's like There's nothing really there, and yet there's this continual awareness that you can't really describe, you can't really put a finger on, you can't really conceive of what it is, but you experience it. It's always there. In fact, it's not only that you experience it, it is your experience. It's just that awareness, the experience and the awareness being the same thing. You're just experiencing things continuously. This happens in kind of like an interdependent cycle of things, but beneath that all, there's like this just continuum of awareness. And this is like our Buddha nature. So Buddha nature is like a really important idea. Buddha nature is an idea that's taught in Mahayana Buddhism as well as in Vajrayana Buddhism. Actually, when you think about it, we have to be clear that Vajrayana is actually a subset of Mahayana Buddhism. And so if you're going to practice the Vajrayana, the Tibetan Buddhism, then you need everything that goes along with practicing the Mahayana Buddhism. You have to have the proper motivation, the wish to bring benefit not just to yourself, but to all sentient beings. And you have to have the same understanding of emptiness and of Buddha nature. But then you add a lot of different methods to it. You kind of look at it from the different perspective. So in this way, the idea of Buddha nature is like a bridge between the sutra tradition of Mahayana and the Tantra tradition of Vajrayana. So you've got sutras and tantras. The sutras are like the sermons the Buddha taught, and the tantras are another class of scriptures. Sometimes we hear about the tantras in various different ways in popular culture. This has nothing to do with that. Tantra just means the continuity of Buddha nature that's always present. But you can't find it, you can't name it, you can't say what it is. There's that continuity of Buddha nature. So the tantra is a Sanskrit word, and it just means like the continuum, the thread that's always going. And so that is looking at the Buddha nature from a different perspective. So if you have an idea that we have the Buddha nature, and that Buddha nature is not just this, it's not merely the continuum of awareness. It's actually when you remove everything that inhibits our Buddha nature from manifesting itself, then actually all of the qualities of a Buddha are present within us already. It's not like we have to become something. If you say, I want to achieve enlightenment, we sometimes talk about it in Buddhism as a path. We might think about it as becoming something different than what we think we are. We're no longer going to be this thing that we think that we have to turn into something completely different. You have to look like a statue. But that's not what it means. Buddha nature, the Buddhahood is just always present. So it just means uncovering the nature that is already present. Hard to say it's present. You can't really say it's something, but it's there. And letting its qualities naturally shine forth. So in the Mahayana tradition, the way to do this is to start looking at the various things that prevent you from seeing it, and to use your intelligence in analyzing and thinking and using a lot of inference to sort of understand your misconceptions on gradually more subtle and subtle levels until you finally see the nature, and then habituating yourself with that until you kind of gradually eliminate all of the obscurations. And when they're all gone, then the Buddha nature within you comes forth. In the Tantra, in the Vajrayana, it's kind of a different process. The process is that you actually take it for a given that you have Buddha nature, and you take that result as the path. You take the fact that there's a Buddha inside all of us, in a sense. Hard to say inside. What is it inside? But there's this Buddha that we can uncover. And if we take that Buddhahood and we meditate on that Buddhahood, then we can manifest that fully. So this is a different method. The one is kind of going from the top down. That's the sutra. You kind of remove everything, all the dirt, all the obscurations that are hiding the Buddha nature, and then when you finally have it all clean, then it's manifest. The other is just to say, it's already manifest. We just have to look. That's the basic difference. So it's like taking understanding that the nature of the mind is the nature of a Buddha. It's Buddha nature. It's the nature of what we call the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, which means like the wisdom, the collection of all the different types of wisdom. So our mind is absolutely, totally pure if we look at it in the right way. When we look outside and we think that there are things that we want, that we like and we want, or when we think that there are things that we don't like and we want to get rid of, when we are completely oblivious and ignore other things and don't see them, when we engage, in other words, out of our greed, hatred, and delusion, we're looking outside. And when you're looking outside, you're looking at all these different illusions that we have of the world, which are all pretty much projections of our own mind. And when we are looking at those and looking outside, then there's no way we can actually see our own nature inside. But if we can turn our attention inwards and look at the nature of our mind through the process of meditation, then we can see that nature of mind, and then we can gradually meditate on it, cultivate it, and gradually then manifest it, and then become Buddhas ourselves. So this is like the nature of the mind is Dharmakaya as it's taught. This is one of the lines in the prayer that we sang at the beginning of the text. It's on the last line on page 7, I think. It says, the nature of thoughts is Dharmakaya, not anything at all, but arising as anything. So there's our thought, not just any conceptual thought, anything you see, any sort of cognition where you have this feeling like you're looking at perceiving something. The nature of that is actually the same as the nature of the wisdom of a Buddha. But instead of looking and thinking that there's a perceiver or a thinker looking out at something that you're thinking, something else that you're thinking of, if you instead look at just the nature of that awareness itself, you'll see that it's exactly the same as a Buddha. So in this way, there's nothing that's happening in our minds that we need to get rid of. There's a famous quote from the Vajra Tantra, which is a famous Buddhist tantra, one of the most important ones. In this, there's nothing to be removed, nor anything at all to add. By seeing the genuine genuinely and realizing the genuine, it's liberation. So you don't have to add anything to your mind. Your mind is perfectly fine as it is. You don't have to add anything to your body. You're perfectly fine as it is. And no matter what it is, there's nothing you have to do to add to it. You don't need to add any new qualities to make yourself a Buddha. Nor do you have to take anything away. You don't have to think, I've got these bad things I have to take away. You just have to see the nature. So there's in this, the nature of the mind, there's nothing to remove, nothing at all to add. All you have to do is really see it as it is, genuinely. And then you are liberated. So this is kind of the basis of like the Mahamudra, or the Vajrayana path. Now another thing about that is that normally we think about all of in English we often talk about them as disturbing emotions, but to be a bit more specific, in Buddhism we use a kind of technical term, afflictions, which in Sanskrit is klesha. So afflictions, it means the things that disturb our minds, your greed, your hatred, and delusion. Those are the big three. Then out of those you start getting envy and pride, wrong views, you've got misunderstandings of the nature of the world, then you get, anger, aggression, contentiousness, doubt, and all of these, and so many other things that happen in our mind that disturb our minds and make it difficult for us to actually just rest so that we can look at the nature of our minds. So normally we think of these are things that cause me problems. We think, I have to get rid of them. Like in the approach of the sutra that we've been speaking about in previous weeks, the idea is that you have to learn to see the nature of things more clearly with your prajna, your really discerning, incisive insight. You have to be able to see the nature of things, and when you see that, then because you have that knowledge, the affliction is abandoned. It goes away. The idea is you have to take away all of the afflictions. And then you have to take away all of the conceptual misunderstandings and misapprehensions and gradually get things away. So you're trying to remove things. But in the Tantra, it's different. There's nothing to remove. So when we look at the nature, when you have an experience of greed, if you know how to look, and that's a big caveat, if you know how to look, you have an experience of greed or of hatred, and you know how to look at it properly, you see that actually its nature is the same as your Buddha nature. Why is that? It's because it's part of your mind. The nature of your mind is the Dharmakaya. The nature of your mind is Buddha nature. And so if there's anything going on in your mind, then its nature is also your Buddha nature. But mostly we don't see that. We don't look at it. We're always so busy. When you feel like the big one everyone always worries about, so I'm going to use it, is anger. You get angry at someone else, and when you're angry at someone else, you are thinking about them, right? What a horrible person. How could they do this? You're angry at them, right? You're thinking out. If you could turn your attention around and look in and actually see the nature of that, you'd see the nature of Buddha. It's like this really clear awareness that's right there. In particular, it's a very clear and strong emotion, right? So it's got a very intense essence. But if you look, you can't pinpoint it anywhere. When you're feeling anger, where is the anger? Where is it? When you think of it being someplace, if you look for it, you can't find it. It's not anywhere, and yet you experience it. Its nature is the same as anything else that goes in our mind. It's empty of anything, and yet you still experience it. So when you look at that nature, then it's transformed. So this is the point of Vajrayana practice. There's a famous quote that goes through. It's from the chorus of the names of Manjushri, or in Sanskrit, the Manjushri Namasangiti. The great oblation, great desire that gives all sentient beings joy, the great oblation of great hatred, great enemy of all afflictions, the great oblation, great delusion, dispelling deluded foolish mind, the great oblation of great anger is greatest enemy, the great oblation, great attachment, eliminating all attachment. So it's the great oblation, the offering, something that makes the Buddhas happy. You make an oblation or offering to the Buddhas and it makes them happy, right? That's why we make offerings, right? To please the person you're making the offerings to. And so what are you offering? Well, you're offering your own desire. Normally, we think of desire as being something we want to get rid of. But here, when you look at it and you see its nature, then you're making an offering of it to the Buddhas. And when you do that, by seeing the nature of the desire, it's transformed. It's transformed into wisdom. And when it's transformed into wisdom, then you know what you need to do to bring joy to all sentient beings. When you look at hatred, if you are looking out at the thing that you feel hatred for, then you're going to end up in a conflict. And if we look at the world news, pretty much at any time, but especially in the last few months, you see the news about the war in Ukraine, and that's clear where hatred leads you to, right? This is the seed comes from hatred in our own individual minds. So if we look at our minds and actually see the nature of the hatred, then it's something that we can actually make as an offering to the Buddha. The great oblation of great hatred, great enemy of all afflictions. And when you see the nature of hatred, then it's transformed into wisdom, the mirror-like wisdom in which everything appears clearly, and you can then all of the afflictions. You see when you see the nature of one affliction, then they all have the same nature. And you can realize all of their nature. And so same with delusion. When you look at delusion, you look at the nature of delusion, then it stops being delusion about something external, but you look at it and you see its nature, and it becomes the Dharmadhatu wisdom, the wisdom of the expanse in which all phenomena occur. And so that overcomes all of our delusions and all of our other attachments. And so in this way, when you look at the nature of all of the afflictions, then there's nothing there to give up. In fact, if you look at their nature, they're just expressions of our Buddha nature. So this is what it means when it says, there's nothing in this, there's nothing to remove, there's nothing at all to add. You don't have to do anything. They are pure in their essence. And each of them becomes like a different type of wisdom. So this is kind of like one of the main points about Vajrayana practice. We want to transform, instead of giving up our afflictions, we want to transform them into something else. We just want to see their nature, so that they then automatically become wisdom. And so there are a lot of benefits to doing this, and one of them is the benefits that it's actually said to be a very quick way to achieve enlightenment. Now, we might look at it from our perspective here as ordinary beings and say, oh, it sounds to me like it's going to take a long time. It's going to take a few years, right? There was a Tibetan master who passed away a couple decades ago, who said that, he said, give me a student, let me have him for 12 years, and I can turn them into a Buddha. If that student has faith in him, of course. So if you think 12 years, that's a long time. Well, if you think about how long do you go to school? You start going to school at the age of 3 or 4, and then you go through, by the time you get to end of high school, you've already gone through 14 years, and you're still not enlightened. Then you go through 4 years of college, or 5 years, and then you go through graduate school, and you're still not enlightened at the end. Right? So it's said that this method of looking at seeing the nature of your mind, which is the basis of the Vajrayana practice, is a really fast way to achieve Buddhahood. The scriptures say you can do it in 1 lifetime, or 3 lifetimes, or 7 lifetimes, or 16 lifetimes. So it's said to be very quick. Of course, you have to work hard in that time. You can't just sit back and let it happen. But it's said to be a very quick, as compared to the sutras, which are said to take, in the Mahayana, it's said it takes a very, very long time, eons, to achieve the state of Buddhahood. So these Vajrayana methods are said to be very, very quick. Now, the other real benefit of the Vajrayana practice is because it's looking at all of our different types of experience and trying to manifest the pure nature of all of them, there are lots of different methods. Sometimes we meditate on ourselves as deities, like the Bodhisattvas of Chenrezig, or Manjushri, or we meditate on ourselves as some other meditational deity. And this is when you realize, and you think, oh, my Buddha nature has all the qualities of a Buddha. So you want to meditate on yourself as Chenrezig, the Bodhisattva of Compassion. Normally we think, oh, I'm different from that Bodhisattva of Compassion. Don't we have a Chenrezig around here someplace? Oh, I always forget where all the paintings are. Yes, we have them well, that's Manjushri, isn't it? Yeah, anyway, so we could meditate on ourselves on Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of Prajna, or wisdom. He's up in that corner. And you might think, okay, he's got a sword. Where's my sword? He's got a text of Dharma. I haven't got one. I could get one, I suppose, and he's yellow. He's kind of golden in color, so I'm not like that. So how can I be like that? But actually, when you think about what Manjushri is, he's the embodiment of the prajna, the wisdom, the discerning wisdom of all the Buddhas. And that's a quality of the Buddha nature. We have that within ourselves. It's not like our nature is any different than the nature of Manjushri. We're the same. And so if we meditate on ourselves in the form of Manjushri, then we can also manifest all of the same qualities as Manjushri has, because they're all inherent within us already. So you just have to practice. And this is like sometimes in daily life we talk about fake it till you make it. So like you have to imagine yourself as the Idam deity, and at first it's kind of made up. And then as you do it more and more, then you actually realize, oh, wait a minute, I actually do have these qualities. I have Buddha nature. I have the ability to do all this. And as you meditate on yourself in the form of that deity, and then you meditate in yourself in the physical form of the deity, but not made out of flesh and blood, but made out of light, then you overcome your clinging to your own physical body as being me. And when you overcome that clinging, then it becomes easier and easier to see your Buddha nature. So this is kind of like a skillful method to actually come to see what your true nature is. So on the outside, it looks like when you're meditating on yourself as a meditational deity, especially when you're meditating on yourself as one of the scary deities who has like 1,000 arms or 6 arms, or like last weekend we did a retreat for the 1,000-arm Chinese practice, and you think, oh my gosh, I can't possibly have 1,000 arms. But actually, it's not necessary to worry about that, because you're developing as you develop that, understanding the purity of what the 1,000 arms are, what they symbolize, the nature of compassion that is the essence of that deity, and you become to manifest it, actualize it within yourself. Then you gradually develop those qualities. I mean, and in the end, it doesn't really matter whether you have 1,000 arms or 2 arms. I think if you have 1,000 arms, you can carry more plates at one time or do more things with your hands. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of difference. The important thing is your mind, right? So that's one thing about the Vajrayana, is we have lots of different methods for different types of people. Because sometimes, like especially when you're meditating on a deity, sometimes some people have more affinity for one than for another. We have green Tara, and some people really feel a strong affinity for green Tara. Then there's white Tara, and some people feel a strong affinity for white Tara. And then there are the deities whom, first you don't have any feeling for them, but then when you start doing the meditation practice, you begin to feel that, like, oh yeah, that you have an affinity for it, that you have like some sort of feeling that you have those same qualities within yourself. And so there are different types of deities you can meditate on. There are different types of practices you can do. So when you talk about meditating on a deity during visualization practices, this is one type of practice we do. And visualization is a really powerful practice, because when you visualize yourself doing things, then you're kind of like building, to use contemporary terms, like you're building neural pathways to think about yourself in a different way than you are. One Tibetan master named Mingyur Rinpoche, who was in Vancouver last spring, spoke about how, like, when Olympic athletes are about to do their run, if they're like a skier and they're at the top of the hill, they mentally go through the entire course before they go down. Or you've got chess players who are playing out the whole game in their minds before they go someplace. You're kind of visualizing everything, and when you visualize it before you do it, then when you get to doing it, it just goes right there. Or if you have experience in music, if you have that idea of the melody in your mind, then when you're playing your instrument, then it just naturally comes out. Right? So it's the same. You have it in your mind and you can bring it out. So when we visualize ourselves in the form of the deities, we can more easily manifest the compassion, the wisdom, and other loving kindness and other qualities that are inherently present within ourselves. So this is one set of practices that we call the creation phase practices. We call them this because they involve like mentally creating an image, creating an idea. And then we've got another whole set of practices called completion phase practices. And these involve things they're like the 6 yogas of Naropa, and these are different than the Hatha yoga that you know. And then there's the 6 yogas of Kala Chakra. There are many other practices, and these basically work with the subtle winds and channels inside the bat body in order to bring them under control. And in this way, gain control of your mind and be able to see its nature more clearly. So these are very special methods, but usually they're a little bit more advanced, and we don't get to them. Often people don't really practice these methods much until they get to retreat. So that's another type of practice. Or then there's also the practice of just sitting, resting in meditation, and then looking at the nature of your mind. This is what we would call, there are a couple of different techniques. Sometimes we call it Mahamudra, and that's the kind of set of instructions that pass down from one tradition, and that's it's very common in our tradition, the Kagyu tradition, so we usually practice Mahamudra meditation. In other Tibetan traditions, there's what we call Dzogchen, the Great Perfection meditation, and it's basically the same meditation, but coming at it from slightly different instructions passed down by a different lineage. They're essentially the same. So we've got lots of different methods for doing the practices. So when we talk about this, we think about how actually these are all different methods for bringing out the purity that is inherent within ourselves. And sometimes when you talk about this, we might get kind of we might overestimate ourselves a little bit. We might think to ourselves, well, everything is pure from the beginning. I don't need to change anything. I can do what I am. Everything is fine. I can just go and do what I want, and then I'll become a Buddha. Well, it's not quite that. When you get to a certain level of realization, you can go and do what you want. And there are stories, some of them are pretty, what do we say? Some pretty extraordinary stories of some of the things that the great masters in the past are said to have done. But we're not there. We can't do those stories because we're regular people. You have to get to a certain level of realization first. You can't do what, when you're a beginner, you can't do what the expert can do. If you have never skied before, you are not going to go to the top of an Olympic downhill course and look down that hill. It doesn't look so steep when you're looking at it on the TV. When you're at the top looking down, it's a different matter, right? Same way, when you are practicing meditation, if you try to do something that's beyond your abilities, there's a real danger that you'll, what do we say? I like to use a skiing metaphor, crash and burn. I guess skiers don't really burn, but you crash. And so you could actually end up causing a lot of harm for yourself and others if you kind of overestimate your abilities. So it's always good to kind of start at the beginning. Take and say, I'm a beginner. I haven't done, especially if you haven't done it in this lifetime. Just sit down and say, start at the beginning, and don't get proud about where you are. Don't overestimate yourself. Instead, start at the beginning. And if you do, then you'll gradually build a stable basis and gradually make progress through the path. If you're already someone who, from conditioning from previous lives, actually have higher capacities and can do all of those things, then when you start doing the basic levels of meditation, it'll become clear, and you don't have to worry about it. So it's always better to kind of start at the beginning and gradually build up. It's very important to do this. And it's also really always very important to remember your motivation. So this begins often from remembering just the basic facts of our lives. We are born, and that is painful. We will die, and that will be painful. It'll be painful for the people we leave behind. When our friends and loved ones pass away, it's painful. We will get sick, and this is painful. We will get old, and I think until you start caring for your elderly parents, you don't really get an idea of how painful aging actually is. It's not like the ads for the retirement pension plans where you see all these people, happily playing pickleball. It's not like that at all when you start getting the suffering of aging. And so these are the great suffering that we're all going to experience. And you have to really recognize that this is just the nature of our lives, and we have to do something to deal with it. If we don't deal with it now, and you just think everything's going to be fine, and then all of a sudden you find yourself at the age of, who knows when it's going to be. It might be 63, it might be 42, it might be 29. Who knows when it is? You find, oh, I've got this incurable disease. Or you get in a car accident, or when something bad happens and your mind is not ready, then it's going to be hard. So you need to take the time now. You have to remember that we have a really precious opportunity as humans to do something. And if we take advantage of it now, then no matter what happens in the future, at least be a little bit further along in the path. And even then, if you really, so that at the time of your death, you can say, I might have wasted my life most of the time, but at least I did this much practice. Time doing stupid things. But I managed to say, 100 Om Mani Padme Hum mantras every day for 10 years. At least I managed to do that much. Then you can have some confidence at that point. And that confidence makes a big difference when you pass on to whatever comes next. And then we also have to remember the motivation of really trying to do things, be as selfless as we possibly can. We have to remember the teachings on mind training, like the 8 verses of mind training by a great Tibetan master named Geshe Langri Thampa, where he says, thinking that all sentient beings surpass a wish-fulfilling jewel for achieving the greatest aim while train and always cherishing them. So you think of all sentient beings, anyone else, as being more important than yourself. And as you do so, in the short term, in this lifetime, the less fixated you are on yourself in this lifetime, then the less there is for you to be upset about. You're thinking about others. When you think about all the sadness and difficulties and dangers and depression and so forth that we experience in this lifetime, the more you can genuinely have genuine compassion and the genuine wish that other sentient beings be free of suffering, the more you can appreciate other people and kind of get out of your own spiral of thoughts by using compassion, then the better off you're going to be in this lifetime. And then not only that, in the future, as it'll bring you help you develop more and more qualities in yourself that will also benefit you in whatever happens. We also have to overcome our pride. So as Geshe Landru Tamba says, wherever I am, whomever I am with, I'll view myself as the lowest of all. I'll train from the bottom of my heart in treasuring others as supreme. Now this doesn't mean that we need to be completely self-abnegating and think, I'm the worst of all people and all that. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that you have to overcome your pride. You can have confidence, but pride is not, if you are confident, it doesn't matter where you're sitting in the room. You can be in the back, you can be wherever. It doesn't matter whether everyone can see you and appreciate you, because you have confidence. If you have pride, you always want to make sure, is everyone else looking at me? Can they see me? See, look at me, I'm this great person. That's a sign of not having confidence. You just have enough confidence, and no matter what is fine. And that means being willing to put other people above yourself. If you're really confident, then you can do that. So these are like important qualities that we have to work on developing in ourselves, so that when we then begin to practice, then we'll become more and more able to really engage in the practice, really make progress in our meditation. So it's important to train our mind in always thinking of others first. Another danger, though, that comes when you talk about the Vajrayana is we talk about Buddha nature. And you might think, well, there's this Buddha nature, and this Buddha nature is me. Well, if your Buddha nature is you, then you've got to be able to point out what your Buddha nature is. So you've got to be able to find what your Buddha nature is. But if you look for it, it's really hard to find. You've got to remember that it's not a thing that you can describe or pinpoint or identify in any way. It's not something that can be fixed in any way. It's just this continually present quality of awareness that's there. It's not something that you can say is a me. If you have this idea that your Buddha nature is you, then you don't have an idea of what Buddha nature is. You still have an idea. You need to look at the nature of that idea instead. So basically, we just need to go through the path step by step. We want to practice. Eventually, we'd like to all be able to practice the great Vajrayana meditations. And when you read the stories of people like Milarepa, the great Tibetan yogi, or some of the great Indian yogis, or there are probably some great yogis in all the traditions we just don't hear about. When you hear about them and hear about their qualities, like, I want to be like them, that means that you don't start where they ended up. You have to start at the beginning where you are. Like with the example of the Tibetan master Milarepa, well, he spent decades, up in the mountains meditating with almost nothing to eat and practicing inner heat and all that. So you think, oh, I want to be like that. Well, you have to start where he did, which is really understanding the suffering of this lifetime and really having a strong motivation, starting at the beginning where you are, and then going step by step by step. And this is the way for us to make progress towards the ultimate goal, which for us Buddhists is Buddhahood, and in the meantime also do things that make things easier for ourselves in this lifetime. So that is basically everything that I thought of saying for today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Yes, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so this question is, for the people who are listening online, is we're talking about developing confidence. So what are the steps for developing confidence? I think sometimes the basis of developing confidence is, first of all, taking a little bit of a step back. not rushing into things, but taking a step back and then looking at your nature. And you have to, at the same time as you have confidence, you have to be aware of where you are. And that means confidence, if you try to do things that are too hard for you, then you're not going to make it. You're going to lose confidence. But you start with things that you can do. See, is this something that's in my ability? And then you do it. And when you do it, then you don't get proud about it, because frankly, when you're a beginner, then anyone can do it pretty much if they try. And you keep going, and then you develop more and more as you do it, and you gain skills and gain confidence. But the main thing is remembering about Buddha nature. Remembering that you have that same pure nature within yourself. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing that you have to change. You just have to get to know what that Buddha nature is. On the surface level, of course, there may be things you need to change. If you might be too pride or proudful, or you might be envious or something. You know what your own problems are. And so you can recognize those problems and you think, okay, there are my problems. And you do what you can not to act on those problems. But then you have the confidence that, yeah, I have Buddha nature within me. I can quiet myself down. So sometimes, like, doing different types of meditation help. First, if we begin with the basic steps of shamatha meditation, of just calming the mind down. Shamatha means tranquility meditation, essentially, calming the mind down and looking and getting this feeling like, yeah, you don't have to run after everything that happens in your mind. Then you can gain some confidence in yourself. And also the confidence of having a good motivation of really wanting to benefit other people, not for your sake, but for theirs. And that all of this brings more and more confidence. So it's a step-by-step process to gradually develop it. So that was your first question, and then you had a second?
The second one, you kind of answered with that whole time as well, but it had to do with basically things like anger is a very outward
Yes.
expression, and there's like anger in words towards like ourselves.
Yes.
How to deal with that, and it's kind of like you are looking at words, but as you're looking at it's like self-defeating.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is that when we have anger, for example, I spoke about it being anger directed outwards, but you also mentioned that sometimes we direct it inwards towards ourselves. Then it is kind of turned inwards. And so how do we deal with that sort of anger? Well, actually, when you really look at it and you're directing your anger inwards, you're directing your anger towards the parts of yourself that you don't like. That's not looking at the essence of the anger yourself. That's looking at some part of you that you don't like. For example, you do something stupid and you say, how could I have been so stupid? I'm so angry at myself for doing that. You have a bad habit and you've given into that bad habit again, and you're angry at yourself for that. You're looking at this thing that you would normally think of as part of you as being sort of separate from you. And you're not looking at the anger. So you need to, if you're doing the Mahamudra sort of meditation, you need to actually learn how to rest. And first you need to be able to look and see the nature of your mind when your mind is just resting. And then when your mind starts moving, you can look at it. See, when you have thoughts. And then when you start feeling anger, then you can look at it. But the main thing that you can try on your own now is when you feel that anger directed in yourself, look, where is the anger? What is it? Not the thing that you're angry at. You've got your bad habit you're angry at, for example. And then there's the angry part. Well, where is the angry part? And look. Yes?
The textbook says the essence nature of our thoughts are Dharmakaya.
Mm-hmm.
So does the thought itself Dharmakaya? Or the nature?
Oh, this is a very, very good question. So it says in the Vajradhara lineage prayer, the nature of thoughts is the Dharmakaya, as it's said. And so the question is the nature of the thought Dharmakaya, or is the thought Dharmakaya? And this is a very, very interesting question. when you are involved in the thought, you're thinking about going to work tomorrow, or staying at home and working tomorrow, whichever the case may be. You're thinking about tomorrow's work. You've got that thought that's happening in your mind. So the nature, when you're thinking about it, and you're focused outwards, and then it's functioning as a thought. At that point, we'd say it's a thought. It's not expressing itself as the Dharmakaya. Its nature is the Dharmakaya, but you don't see it because you're following the thought. If you have the thought about going to work tomorrow, and you look in and you see its nature, then the nature is the Dharmakaya. Now, this isn't so easy to do. I'm using these big words, and I have to admit that I can't really do that myself. So I'm just saying what I've heard other people. It's you see the Dharmakaya. That nature of the thought is not separate from the thought. You cannot find the nature of a thought without a thought. You can't find the nature of fire without fire. Right? I want to have sometimes I'm going to go off on Tibetan translators. Sorry, I'm a translator myself, so I have to do this. Sometimes we have translations where you say, the lack of an inherent nature. And so when you say there's a lack of an inherent nature, then is there some sort of exherent nature? Some nature that isn't part of something? No. The nature of a thought is nowhere else than in the thought. But you have to look at it in the right way to see it as the Dharmakaya. So whether we realize the nature as the Dharmakaya, or whether it functions as a thought, depends on which way we're looking at that occurrence in our mind. And sometimes we're not even aware that it's a thought. We're just thinking about the other thing. You're thinking about work, and so you're completely fixated on work, and you don't even see that there's a thought in your mind, although you're thinking it. And so the first step is you've got to become aware of the thoughts in your mind. And as you go through, shamatha meditation, the basic steps of meditation, you become more aware of that. And then you need to be able to actually look and see, well, what is the nature of those thoughts? And that's a few steps down the road. So are there any other questions this morning or this afternoon? Or should we move on to our meditation session for today? Yes.
So you talked about looking at the nature of anger as separate from looking towards and to try to look at the nature and not as itself. How would you exactly do that?
Well, this is a very big question, and there are a lot of instruction manuals. Basically, when you experience anger, instead of looking at how it feels, or what you feel it about, then you try to look at where is it? Where did it come from? Where does it go? Does it stay someplace? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? Is there anything identifiable about it? If it's not anything identifiable, then what is it? So you look at it in that way. So you kind of divorce yourself from the content. And divorce yourself from the quality, just looking at what is it. And so this takes a lot of control over the mind to be able to really do it. So it's kind of actually, in some ways, it's a fairly advanced meditation. But you can sort of take a little bit of a start now and sort of take it and see how it works. But really to be able to do it actually means that you have to really be able to have a bit of control, being able to over your mind, and then developing the ability to look inwards and go through the steps, step by step. Ultimately, we want to get to the point where we can do that. Still, when you get angry at something, then you can just give it a try. Where is the anger? Is it in your head, or your toes, your heart, your pinky? Where is it? Okay, so let's do a little bit of meditation. And since we've started talking about the Vajrayana today, I want to do a type of shamatha meditation still, but one that's a little bit more connected with the Vajrayana teachings. So in past weeks, we've primarily been doing the meditation where you count your breath. And so this week, instead, what I'd like to try is what we call the Vajra Recitation, a big word. But what it really means is that you're just thinking of the sound of a mantra as you breathe. And so this is a very simple mantra. It's 3 syllables. Om, Ah, Hung. Om, Ah, Hung. So if you've done any Tibetan Buddhist practice before, you've heard these syllables lots of times because we always say them. In fact, they're often a part of many other mantras. So what you do in this meditation is you first sit up straight. So let's try this, so everyone try. Well, I'm going to readjust my legs. Sit up straight, and then rest your hands evenly in your lap, or you can rest them on your knees, whichever is more comfortable for you. It doesn't matter which. And relax your body. And then when you start to feel relaxed, on your next breath, when you breathe out, think of the word syllable Om. Then when your breath is kind of pausing a bit before you breathe back in, you think Ah. And as you breathe back in, you say Hum. So like Om, Ah, Hum for each breath. So you breathe out, you say Om in your mind. Om, Ah. And breathe in, say Hum, Om, Ah, Hum. Now take a little bit of a break. When meditating, it's best to do short periods of time, repeatedly. So we take a little break, and then settle yourself again. And we'll do a few more minutes. Just relax your body. And when you feel ready, then just bring your attention back to the mantra in your breath as you breathe out, saying Om, Ah as you pause, then Hum as you breathe back in. Okay, thank you. That's been about total of about 10 minutes of meditation. Maybe that's enough for today. Maybe it's not, I don't know. So now that we have done, we began by thinking about our motivations. We spoke about it. I spoke a lot, then you all had some questions, and now we've come to the end. And so if you just get up and leave, it's like it's all gone. And so what we do at the end is we do what we call a dedication of merit. This means that you think about all the good that we've done by, and here in particular, teaching and listening to the Dharma. And you imagine that you're giving it away to all sentient beings, that all sentient beings can be forever freed of any of the suffering of birth or aging, sickness, and death, so that they can all be brought to the state of complete happiness, which we happen to call Buddhahood. And so if we do this, and you take a moment to do this, then it's like, once you've done that, no one can take that merit of doing this away from you, because you've already given it away. And so it's already like out there for everyone, and you will continue to benefit from it. Others will benefit from it, and it can't be like canceled out by anything. And also just on a psychological level, when you've done something and you're finished, if you're up and gone before anything happens, before it's even done, then it's just gone in your head. You take some moment and you think about things, and then it kind of sinks in more deeply. So that's why we recite this dedication of merit. And we do a short verse, which is on page 217, the very last page of our prayer books. And we'll do it in Tibetan, and then I'll also sing it in English, although with a different